Hello, good evening, and welcome back. Neil Ferguson's doomsday prediction of 510,000 COVID deaths went unchallenged by Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, despite warnings it was 12 times too high, as Number 10 panicked into full lockdown. As they go on to say, there's an exclusive for Mail on Sunday. New biography of Boris Johnson being serialised. The book by Tom Bauer explains how Sage meeting told a worst-case scenario. The Imperial College professor warned some 80% of Brits could be infected, and neither of the government's scientific advisors outrightly challenged prediction. And as they go on to detail, and it is a valid point, that when you come to something like this, and Boris Johnson on the Cobra meetings as well, that, well, sure, he could be there, but then, even then, if he were to be told, well, this is what the scientists have come up with, if he were to then say, no, I don't think so, then he would be slammed for not listening to the scientific advisors and the experts and ignoring the people that he should be listening to, in which case he kind of had to go along with it. And as it turns out, they were very, very fallible. Should there have been more criticism of this in the first place? Yes. Should somebody like Boris Johnson have thought, yeah, maybe this needs to be looked into more. What are other people doing? What else could we be looking at as a possible solution or answer or actual prediction? Yes, quite possibly. But seeing as Sweden was the only one to have taken that path because they took different data instead of what ICL decided to put in, then it wasn't as if there were a lot of people that they could then go to see what they would be doing about it. Could he have then said, fine, but what impact would this have on the rest of the country? And therefore go with, this is what the virologist wishes to say about it, but what about the economists, for example, and whichever other focus groups and think tanks that you wish to think of how people could be affected in order to then draw a conclusion, then yes, quite possibly. Did he think that maybe he didn't have enough time? Yes. Did he in retrospect? Yes. Even then, if you were to decide to take 2 days in order for people to have the material spread out to them and then decide if it was worth it to come back, then yes, he could have done that, most assuredly. And at the end of the day, that really is what a leader should be doing. That of course they will have advisors, and they'll have advisors for different things from different people, and then their decision is from collating all this information in order to then make the decision that they think is what's best for the team or the country or the group that they are leading. That is what a leader has to do. They do not need to know everything. They simply need to know where to find the information they need to know. And if you wish to pin the blame on Boris Johnson, then that is the one point that you can blame on him for not taking enough of a leadership role and instead just going along with what one particular group of experts said, as that is definitely the pushback that he could say. If he did not go along with the scientific experts in this particular point, then his response would have to be, oh, yes, we understand exactly what they've said, and I can recite it back to you because I'm aware of what's happened. However, we've also had to take into consideration the knock-on effects that it would have had gone by these other experts in different fields, and having collated it all together and averaged it out and deciding what is best, we've decided that we are not going to go into full lockdown. That would be the simple response, and then he would have to stick to that. However, that is not the same case for Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. As they say, Bauer tells how a critical meeting of SAGE on February 25th was presented with the reasonable worst-case scenario from Professor Ferguson, under which 80% of Britons would be infected and the death toll would be 510,000 people. The author writes, this was an improvement on Ferguson's earlier assessment that between 2% and 3% would die, up to 1.5 million deaths, even with mitigation measures, he said. And that is a very important thing, that when we look back and say, well, hey, we haven't got nearly 1.5 million deaths, in which case we've done better because the mitigation worked. No. This prediction was with the mitigation measures. It isn't if we didn't do anything. In that case, it would have been significantly worse. As he says, that even with the mitigation measures, the death toll would be 250,000, and the existing intensive care units would be overwhelmed 8 times over. So, no, what he's on about has been well off, and it's been well off in all the previous predictions that he'd made as well. Thankfully, he has lost his place within SAGE because of his own personal life and breaching the lockdown rules, which is really not the correct reason to have lost his position, because sure, he's going against the law of the land at the time in which he suggested, but it should really be to discredit him and to remove any possibility that people would listen to him in the future, and not to try and say, oh, he had a good idea, but he was a fallible human. It's like, no, he had no good ideas, and he was just full of falsehoods, as that is the fact of the matter when it comes to him and his virologist predictions. And neither Valance nor Whitty outrightly challenged Ferguson's model or predictions. By contrast, in a series of messages from Michael Levitt, a Stanford University professor who would correctly predict the pandemic's initial trajectory, Ferguson was warned that he had overestimated the potential death toll by 10 to 12 times. Bauer's biography, which is being serialized, well done, Mail on Sunday, goes farther than any previous biography towards solving the enigma of Boas. And the book reveals how shortly before the national lockdown on March 16th, Ferguson forecast that 1/3 of the over 80s who were infected would be hospitalised, of which 71% would need intensive care using ventilators. This exaggerated prediction that hospital would be overwhelmed by at least 8 times the usual admittance rate made the lockdown all but inevitable. Ferguson was forced to resign from his advisory position in May for breaking the government's own social distancing rules to meet his married lover. Of all the things to be caught at, it's like catching a drug dealer because of a speeding ticket. It's that kind of thing. So, Bauer suggests that the chronic failures at PHE, Public Health England, Quango, whose responsibilities included maintaining the pandemic influenza stockpile, prevented the mass early testing, which could have transformed the UK's ability to contain the virus. However, with the idea of testing and containing the virus, that isn't necessarily true at all, seeing as, well, they say, the number of infections per day in the UK has risen so much, and yet the deaths haven't. Well, could that perhaps be because more people are getting tested than before, and therefore, of course, you're going to have more confirmed cases because you're simply having more people tested, and you've got to consider the rate of false positives as well, given how many different types of coronaviruses there are, and also if it's going to be getting the antibodies and not just the antigens, in which case you're going to be seeing a much higher proportion of people being tested positive than actually do have the virus, and it is not going to be a representative sample of the rest of the population. But that's about it for this one. So it is predominantly to say that we knew at the time, as we were all saying, this is basically just confirmation of what we've been saying for months now, that this prediction put forward by Ferguson was utter shit from the outset. And now having seen Sweden's response and how they've been doing so well, surely twinning the reason that we went into lockdown in the first place, as well as a country that did it better, would surely say, well, then we don't need to do this anymore. We're done. We've realised that it was a mistake and it was totally unnecessary. And now that we're seeing a second wave, which could just be down to more testing, but if they're saying it's serious, then it shows that lockdown doesn't work in the first place. And Sweden has showed that lockdown isn't necessary either. So let's not fuck about the bush anymore, and let's just admit that, well, this is life now. There's nothing we can do about it. If you wish to isolate yourself, then by all means go do that. But let's not ruin anyone else's life because of your own life choices. But as always, let me know down below what you guys think about this. If you think, well, hey, no, just because he made a mistake on the initial one doesn't mean it's wrong to do it again. Or if you think, well, yeah, we've seen what happened, and we've seen what's happened in other countries where they haven't done it, and it's pretty much the way to go. Either way, always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say, and as always, until next time, have a good one.